Welcome everybody to the AI Hub Beyond the Medical Datathon. In case you guys don't know, although hopefully most of you do, we ran a virtual datathon back in June. And this was a medical datathon where we had 18 teams working on 18 unique problems that they were trying to solve using data and AI. And so this was a combination of clinicians and data scientists and all sorts of people with different expertise that worked on these clinical problems. At the end of the 2 weekends that the datathon ran over, these teams had to then pitch their solution to a panel of judges, and these judges were then deciding on 2 winners. So we actually had 2 great sponsors for the event, both Google Cloud Platforms and Amazon Web Services. So there was a winner from each, and the teams were competing for some pretty big prizes with each of those platforms to continue building their solution and hopefully use the solution to actually change, healthcare and health treatment. So that was really exciting, and we really hoped that the winners and even the other teams involved would go on to continue to build their projects, and that's exactly what's happened. So we just thought today that we would catch up. It's been about 3 months since the datathon, catch up with the both winning teams. So they were called GCP2 and AWS2, and hear about the progress they've made and where they're at now. So I just want to introduce you all to, we have Tobin South, who is a HDR candidate from the School of Mathematical Sciences at the University of Adelaide. Welcome, Tobin.
How's it going, everyone?
And then we also have Dr. Nimai Etheridge representing the other team from GCUH, and he's a research registrar. So
hey,
welcome.
How's it going?
So welcome. Thanks for joining us today. So I'm just gonna ask a few questions, and then both of these guys will give us a presentation on their solutions. So I'm sure you're all keen to hear what the unique solutions they came up with were. So we will get to that. But first, I just wanted to ask you both, what is your professional background? So Nimai can answer that first.
So currently I'm an emergency physician, I guess, a research registrar and an emergency registrar. So I'm a doctor. I'm about 7 years into my final training, a couple of years from away from making it to specialist. And this year I've had the privilege of having a part-time non-clinical role dedicated to research under Prof. Gerben Kaisches, who's running the ED research group there, which has been a really amazing opportunity to sit down and explore some of these topics. And before I was in medicine, I used to be a software developer working across a number of web startups and in the embedded space and integration space, a whole bunch of stuff, but that was a long time ago.
Awesome. And Tobin?
Well, so Nimai brings any clinical, if you have any medical questions, point at him. I am purely a data scientist, currently in research, but bits and pieces in consulting over the last few years. So I can maybe talk more data, but I'm going to avoid any medical questions as much as possible.
Okay, sounds good. We won't put the pressure on you. And I'd be interested to hear about how, obviously seeing as you come from such diverse backgrounds, how did you hear about the datathon?
Well, I had the pleasure of running into Brent Richards at work one day, and I mentioned to him a year or so ago that I was interested in doing a bit of AI computer-aided diagnosis using some of the new computer vision stuff around. And we had this project going on within Gold Coast about trying to reach out to Stanford University and assist them with their AI research. And that's still ongoing, but through this, there was like conversations among a bunch of people, and Brent kind of tapped me on the shoulder to come and join the AWS2 team to see what we could do here locally.
Fantastic. And Tobin?
I wish I had a story as good as that. I think I found it in an email that got sent around at some, I think it was the Research Centre, the Australian Centre for Excellence in Mathematics and Statistics, sent out an email, and a few people who were on that mailing list joined up and got involved. And I was one of them.
Excellent. Good. So the outreach worked. That's good. It's good to know. And then following on from that question, what was your motivation to sign up?
Well, I think we're kind of in a bit of a privileged position here at Gold Coast University Hospital to have a number of these types of research organisations around, and having the clinical AI hub here right next door. I mean, it's an opportunity that's too good to pass up. So that's definitely why I got on board.
Excellent.
Mine was more of a broad interest. As a data scientist, you can do lots of cool stuff. But you need to know people in fields doing things to actually add value to those fields. And I thought this datathon was a perfect opportunity to chat to a variety of clinicians and other cool people and chat about the problems.
Excellent. Yeah, we did have a lot of feedback like that, that there are a lot of people with these kinds of skills in data science and machine learning, and they just want to be able to apply those skills to a problem that they can get passionate about and that matters. So I think that was one cool outcome of the Datathon, was bringing together all these kinds of people. And have you always been interested in either AI and machine learning, or medicine, or both?
Initially, I never thought I'd end up being a doctor. I was a pretty average student. It wasn't until I got through my mid-20s that I made that switch, and thankfully I was lucky enough to get a spot. And then, I mean, I kind of left software engineering just as the AI revolution was really heating up again, but it's come full circle for me. So this is great.
You missed out on all the fun, but you came back again.
Yeah. Well, all the hard work's been done. It's amazing. You can take some models and wrap it around in software and start to actually build some really nice solutions now, which you couldn't have done 5-10 years ago. It was still all too experimental.
I do think that's probably when I'd say my passion started as well. You do statistics or some computer science, and it's real boring, and then suddenly you discover Python and you realize how much fun you can have with it. Or in our case, React, which you might talk about later. And it's really, really useful, and that's what gets you energized.
Excellent. Sounds good. Now, would you have done this project that you're about to present to us, do you think, if it weren't for the Datathon?
Probably not, to be honest. I mean, it's required a couple of things to come together for us, but more than that, it's required something to really push us into gear. And I think having the Datathon was the thing that kind of really just broke the floodgates and got us as a team sitting down and thinking, well, maybe we can actually do something here. Whereas before, the world of medical software is such a walled garden, and as clinicians, we all hate the software we use. And it actually, causes mistakes which have like real world impacts. But how do you compete with these big companies like Cerner and Epic and that are just continually churning out shite software, to excuse my French. and look, the AI Datathon kind of provided a little bit of a focus for us to actually sit down and just look at what we could do, and it's been really gratifying to see kind of what we can do at the moment, and with a bit of help and a bit of funding, hopefully what we will eventually be able to do in the long run. I really think that we can make something big here.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and to follow from that, I'm going to take that probably not to a definitely not, because the whole idea for what we're presenting today and what we've been working on came out of the Datathon. It came out of chatting to people like Brent and a whole bunch of the other mentors, and getting the group in those Zoom calls to chat and have ideas. So definitely not.
That's fantastic. And that's exactly what we want to hear, is that these events are actually having an impact and they're actually supporting these kinds of ideas. So very cool to hear that. So we won't delay any longer, and we'll get everyone to get a peek into what projects you've been working on. So we'll start with Dr. Nimai today. If you want to pull up your presentation and tell us about the project that you worked on from the Datathon, and let us know where you're up to.
So we don't actually have a presentation today. We've done something a bit more risky. We've actually got a live prototype. It's very early on, and hopefully it doesn't crash on me. But what good product doesn't get launched with a crappy prototype? We sat down. So our team was tasked with, can we build something that just supports radiologists and support clinicians to work a little bit smarter and a little bit more targeted. You know, I think everyone in the computer learning space, machine learning space, is trying to build a better diagnostic algorithm. And honestly, humans are amazing diagnosticians. We can take information from all over places and very quickly build an incredible, you know, set of predictions, which I think, you know, computers will probably never surpass. But what we can do with computers is we can automate the boring stuff, and we can help people sift through the huge amount of information that comes our way. So, you know, in an average day at Gold Coast University Hospital in a single ED, we probably get you know, anywhere between 70 to 100 chest X-rays, most of which are completely normal. You add Rabina onto that, and then you add to all the wards, and you're talking about 300 chest X-rays. And in the emergency department, we're under intense time pressure. We kind of have to have a whole patient sorted out within 4 hours. And so you don't actually generally wait to see what the radiologist thinks. You just have a look at the X-ray yourself, make a decision, and send that patient on their way to wherever they need to be. And most of the time we get it right. And most of the time there's not a problem with any of that. But, you know, there's a surprising number of root cause analyses, we call them, where, you know, something's gone wrong, and they've looked back through, you know, the patient's journey, and there's at times been noted, you know, there were subtle signs on this X-ray or subtle signs on this test that could have been picked up earlier. And so what we want to do is try and flag those X-rays that have a chance of being something going wrong, so that at least when a radiologist who, you know, for them reporting chest X-rays is low priority. They have all their MRIs, they have their CTs, they have their ultrasounds, and now as more and more are doing procedures as well, you know, they want to get out into the interventional space. They don't want to be stuck reporting, you know, chest X-rays that, you know, a med student can look at, especially the normal ones. So to us, this seems like a perfect match, first cab off the rank to apply some artificial intelligence smarts. And so what we're looking at here is our smart radiology work list.
Nimai, just sorry to interrupt. We can't actually see anything. We can just see it. I don't know if it's the wrong screen.
How's that?
Much better.
Did I just take it off?
Yep. There we go. There we go. Perfect.
Done. All right. So now what you're actually looking at here, rather than my desktop background, is our smart radiology work list. Each of these, like one of the things is the radiologist, they get minimal clinical information when they look at a work list. It doesn't pull any data in from our clinical systems. And so basically they'll often just have a 3-word, you know, a 4-word sentence like shortness of breath, and a chest X-ray, and no patient demographics, no idea about that patient's clinical situation. And so we start off just by even just adding this QAD score here, which is the Queensland Adult Deterioration Detection System, which is just a simple number that gives you an idea of what their vital signs are doing. And then coming through, so that list that you saw on the last page, that's actually where the bulk of our artificial intelligence goes into, just sorting that list. Currently, all our X-rays are just ordered in time of ordering. And so, you know, like basically the oldest ones get reported first, and the newer ones have to wait till all the ones before it need to get reported before they're even looked at. So first thing that we're aiming to do is just to pick out the ones that might have a high priority so that they move to the top of the list. And then the other ones are all just done in time of the normal order. So, you know, at the very least, you're not worse than what you currently are, but ideally the system's picked up the 2 or 3 chest X-rays out of 50 that actually need to be looked at straight away. And so coming on to the next screen, you've got patient clinical insights, which again doesn't exist in any of the imaging clients. They don't get any of this kind of information that might be helpful for them. You know, so talking about what the patient came for. This one's, you know, we see this in ED all the time. They present for something random, but then they go, oh, by the way, I've been getting this intense chest pain every time I walk for the last 2 months. And you're like, maybe we should take a look at you. And you can see straight away from this patient, they're actually really unwell. Now, this is all data that we've had to kind of fudge ourselves because we don't at the moment have access to the live clinical feeds. But I mean, this is a clinical scenario. And so you can see straight away that this is a sick patient before you've even started to look at the image. And we've built like a full DICOM viewer here from scratch. So, I mean, you've got all the standard DICOM white level stuff, panning. My Zoom's not working. I'll have to have a chat to my other developer about that. But by and large, you're not losing anything that you would get in a normal IntelliViewer by using our app. And the next thing we want to be able to do is just make it easier to generate the report. So we've got here a voice-enabled reporting system. So I can just say something like left-sided consolidation, and that will go back into the system. I hit submit report. Now this, one of the beautiful things about running this stuff live is that we can actually do reinforcement learning. So it's pretty straightforward for us to quickly just ask the radiologist to give their number one diagnosis, which for this one is consolidation. And then that actually feeds back into our AI model to continually improve the algorithm over time. So this basically will just kind of get around the fact that, you know, getting access to labeled data is really hard. And so we're actually getting our users to label the data as we go, and thus improving the efficacy of our tool. And then, because, you know, for us, we're all about getting in a flow. When we program, you just want to get your music on, get pumping, and you don't want anything to kind of block you from what you're doing. So our user interface basically just gets you straight going into the next one. You can generate a report there and say, you know, small right-sided effusion. And then you submit report. And as you can see, you can just keep going and smash out heaps of these really quickly. But yeah, so that's where we're sitting at the moment. So we've got our AI model running on the background. We've got the data going to and from. Our next step is to work with Gold Coast University Hospital and the radiology department to start to link this into some real clinical data. And we've got a research protocol in place where we're aiming to try and get some metrics around this and actually just provide some data to see whether or not this technology is actually quite useful. And, you know, at the very least, if that's all we can show that, you know, AI is actually a clinically relevant piece of technology, then that's a win. But, you know, as we keep building this stuff out, we're always pretty excited and amazed at what we can do with the tools that are around. So that is where AWS 2 is up to.
Perfect. That was really interesting and amazing what you guys have done in that short amount of time, and just watching all of the different features you have. So that was very cool. Thank you for sharing that. I want to make sure that the attendees know, please feel free to post any questions in the chat or the Q&A box. As they're talking, we will have a Q&A at the end, so you can pick these guys' brains on this amazing technology they're developing. So we will then hear from GCP2 now and see what you guys have been up to.
Yeah, that was a fantastic presentation and a world premiere of the product. It takes time to build these kind of products, so well done to it.
Yeah, it's taken a lot of light.
Click and show off. I have a PowerPoint, but if you bear with me, hopefully you'll get a sense of what the Clear Consent team are actually doing, or aka GCP 3.2. So first, just to start off with, because I think it's really important, we just want to acknowledge the Indigenous Australians as the traditional custodians of the land we're all chatting on today. And I'd also really like to thank my team, Shruti and Curtis, who have done fantastic work putting stuff together to build out the Clearer Consent product. And it's been fantastic meeting and working with you guys through the Datathon. So what are we actually working on today? So we've been working on consent forms. You've got a hip replacement here. I've got a form here as well. Oh, if the Zoom back and does it. Fortunately, I'm not getting a hip replacement. Hopefully not soon at least. But if I did, or if you went to a hospital and for a procedure, you would be handed one of these consent forms, these long, confusing consent forms. And the purpose of these is that you should give consent whenever you're undergoing a procedure, right? If the doctor's going to replace your hip, you want to agree to it. And part of giving that consent is being informed and actually understanding what you're consenting to. But therein lies the problem. These forms are not conducive to actually understanding what you're consenting to and actually getting a rich knowledge of what's going to happen to you. And this is particularly a challenge for people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, cold backgrounds, who have unique cultural concerns that need to be met. So let's just give a bit of details on that. You may or may not know this, but there are 300 different languages spoken in Australian homes, with more than 1/5 of Australians speaking a language other than English at home. This means that when you are getting consent forms like these in a hospital, you often either need an interpreter, of which they can only interpret to so many languages, and it's a huge staffing cost for hospitals, or you end up having family members that have to translate the consent form for their family members, and it's not a great solution. We can fix this with technology. Beyond that, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people represent almost 3% of the population, and they have unique cultural considerations that need to be taken into account when consenting to procedures. And that doesn't even include all the different cultures in Australia and the different backgrounds that each deserve their own understanding of the consent form so they can make informed consent. We can't have a one-size-fits-all when it comes to consenting to your own body and the procedures on it. So what is the problem right now? Let's just summarize this. You have patients that are anxious, that have language and cultural barriers, and usually don't know medical terminology, right? You know, look at people when they're looking at these consent forms. If they don't know a word, they're probably going to Google it. And at that point, who knows what information they're getting about the procedure? You have doctors and medical professionals who, you know, it's their job to make sure patients understand, but you're stressed, you're time poor. And even when you do make time for a patient, if a patient sits there and nods, it's easy just think that they understand it, sign all the boxes and send them into the operating room. And it's really not helped by these forms. They're complex, they're long, and they're legal in nature. It's 2020, we can do better than that. So what's our solution? It's a patient-tailored digital consent product. So simply an app that lets you have a dynamic interface that actually meets the needs of the patient specifically. And so, right, what does that actually look like? Obviously, it's a consent form, an app like you just saw where you can click through buttons, but you can do the simple stuff. You can do multilingual support. You can do text-to-speech and accessibility and voice recognition. You can do some user-centered design, right? We've had the internet for a while now. We've figured out how to do most of these things pretty well. And it's time that our consent infrastructure actually reflected that. And importantly, you can actually have dynamic information content, right? The amount of information that you should be able to access for even a simple hip replacement is huge, because every different culture and background deserves its own unique perspective on the consent. And so actually having a pool of information that can be customized and accessed dynamically by each patient is something we are sorely in need of. And it's not just the typical bells and whistles that you get in some kind of form like this. We can go beyond that. Using chatbot interfaces, we can have question answering tools that actually tailor the answers to you based on your background and considerations, that people can actually, in natural language, ask their questions. This frees up doctors' time and means you can actually spend time asking question after question. And these products, they very much exist. We've got the tools for them. And we can also use technology, use the Zoom technology that we're using right now to connect to cultural support persons and interpreters. It is a huge staffing cost to provide these kind of support persons and interpreters. And being able to connect to them digitally means you can have a wider array of support that anyone can access anytime. So, what's the current progress? Well, we do have a nice app that I could show you, but instead I'm going to settle for a nice piece of code because there's far too many bugs that I don't want to admit to putting into the code. So we're building it. It's looking fantastic, and we are very excited to take it into a clinical setting to try it out, iterate, and hopefully, take it somewhere really impressive. But taking the current status aside, let's talk big picture. Why do we need this? Well, let's answer some questions. How well do patients actually understand what they're consenting to? This is a question you'll see in the literature. People are concerned about the informed consent, right? So a huge challenge in Queensland health and all around the world. But how well do patients actually understand? It's hard to figure out. Well, an app like this actually lets us collect data on this, right? With free-form patient questions and little mini tests to check understanding throughout the consent process, you can actually figure out if people are understanding what they're consenting to start actually tackling the problem and designing for meeting that challenge. All right. What about getting these consent forms into the infrastructure? Well, we can use natural language processing to take the pre-existing consent content and put it into the digital format to actually share with patients. And then think, simple, especially in, a COVID world. What if you need more time to think about your options? What if 10 minutes sitting with an iPad in a hospital isn't enough to make decisions about your health? Well, you can create a take-home app experience that lets people actually think and marinate and ask questions about, what they're consenting to. So, just to bring it all back and summarize, why are we doing this? What's the result? Well, with a good app, you can get better patient understanding of consent, something we all want. You can get real data and insights on patient concerns and questions. It frees up clinicians' times and interpreter times, lowering costs. And importantly, it supports the cultural and linguistic diverse backgrounds that need better support with our informed consent infrastructure. And so I'm sold that it's a pretty good idea, and I'm excited to be working on it with Trudy and Curtis. And hopefully you think it's pretty cool too. There's a question slide, but I think we'll open up to everyone having questions.
Excellent. Another fantastic presentation. Thanks, Tobin. And such a great idea. It's hard to believe that doesn't exist already, but at the same time, it sounds so novel and so useful, especially obviously for people who, English isn't their first language, and it can be quite a nerve-wracking situation to be trying to understand consent when you're having perhaps a serious operation or something like that. So definitely something that sounds really important that's needed. So just a couple of follow-up questions for you guys, but yes, audience, feel free to start asking questions. I just wanted to know, what are the next steps for each of your teams?
Well, for us, we're at prototype phase, but now we need to actually start getting this kind of in a test bed inside the hospital so that we can start seeing how our users interact with it and just see whether or not what we're doing is really useful. So like I said, we've got we've done an ethics submission, and we're drawing up a research protocol in order to try and get some as unbiased as we can, I guess, because that's always going to be a hard thing, but some unbiased actual real data on whether or not this is useful, and try and get that out into the literature. So that's where we're up to next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess there's a couple of elements there. It's getting the real patient data to test the product on the real patient data, and then also understanding how this would fit into the workflow, the clinical workflow. So there's a couple of different things you need to do when you're trying to integrate this into the system.
Yeah, and as you say, integration is massive. I mean, this relies on you know, a PACS server, a RIS server, an electronic medical record. So there's going to be a fair amount of integration work that goes on to just link it in. But thankfully, in this day and age, using the HL7 protocols, it's getting a lot easier to make medical software talk to each other.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, and Tobin?
Have to reiterate, agreed in the sense that the hard part is actually getting into the clinical setting, testing out, you know, no plan survives contact with the real world, and, you know, iterating and improving to actually get a product that's worth using. You know, you're never going to get doctors to use the radiology tools unless they're good, and you're never going to get patients to be happy with their informed consent until you have a good product. And to do that, you need to get into a clinical setting, talk to the right people and start scaling up and getting things working.
Yep. So sort of that testing and trialing and getting feedback and tweaking the product. And yeah, but that, like you say, it requires you to be able to get in first. So that's always the challenge.
Navigate issues that always arise.
Yeah, exactly. We do have one question here for Nimai. It says, so the prioritization will depend on clinician input?
Initially, the prioritization is just off the basis of our initial model training, and so with that, you know, what makes it successful is lots of well-labeled data, but over time, our system will feed essentially use our radiologists as data labelers. So we'll be learning from each prediction versus each report and just marrying up whether or not we've got it right. So over time, the system will continue to get more intelligent.
Yep. And I just read out one of the comments that Jackie made, which is a good point, is that the consent product will be excellent for people with intellectual disability. So it's a product that will bring in a lot of inclusion, which I think is very exciting and very important. Kelvin Ross is asking, Tobin, what sort of data do you need access to, or what do you need to collect?
A good question, and we're kind of lucky in that we're not taking, you know, real patient data that currently exists and trying to use that to build the platform, because that creates its own issues. What we need are consent forms, and they are available on the internet. So we've already made significant progress in digitizing those. But what we need is to actually speak to people of the cultural backgrounds and you know, physical and intellectual disabilities that we're speaking to actually figure out how best to tailor the product to them. So it's old-fashioned data in actually talking to people. We don't need to web scrape too many things. So we're kind of lucky in that way.
Yep, excellent. Then we have Cara Burns is asking, hey Nimai and Tobin, great presentations. I'm just wondering how much human-centered design and human factors were considered in development of the projects. Is it relevant now, or will it be explored as the projects are developed? So I'll let both of you answer that.
Yeah, for us, I guess the whole strength of what we're doing is I guess it's more clinician centered design. I mean, for me, coming from a software background into medicine, you know, you've gone from having amazing tools to the most useless computer programs that I've come across in a long time. And so a lot of the push for this software has been, you know, how do we sit down and create software that actually makes us work faster as clinicians? And so every single design element that we've put there and we've talked about has been, you know, is this useful at the time of reporting for the radiologist? It's all about glanceability. How can you quickly look and get access to the information that you need? And how can we present it in a way that doesn't break your reporting flow? Because, you know, a radiologist will actually only spend 30 seconds to a minute looking at a chest x-ray. And so if they can get into a really good flow, then they can do lots very quickly. But our current software just doesn't support that. So yeah, to answer you, this is all clinician centered design at the moment.
Yeah, on our end, we're trying to design for patients. And look, I'm a data scientist. I just see the matrix. I'm not a human being, I don't think, after a while doing data science. But shout out in that sense to Shruti, my team member, who has, really been a champion of this and trying to make sure that we actually think about how we're designing. And it's definitely a sense that once you start developing the product, you really start realizing how many decisions need to be made and how much you have to think about, human-centered design.
Yeah, it's really true, really interesting. And I was just going to ask Nimai, because I think we got less of a sense from your presentation, which was great, but just a sense of how does what your solution proposed differ from what's currently done?
I think to understand that, you'd need to sit down and watch a radiologist at work. So initially, like I said, we'd probably get about 300 chest x-rays a day at Gold Coast, but then on top of that, you've got all the other imaging studies. So it might take 20 minutes to half an hour to report a CT scan, more to do an MRI. And so the chest x-rays get forgotten about, and they build up and they end up with a list, might be a day, last 2 days worth of unreported chest x-rays, just sitting there in a list, and you might have 400 or 500 that need to be done at any given time, and so that amount of information overload is quite daunting. And then looking at the tools, so I mean, we've just focused on chest x-rays first because that's the most straightforward one, but this will, we will extend this out to all the imaging modalities. But when a radiologist is looking at an image, for them to get access to the actual relevant clinical information, they then have to go into several other systems, which they have to log back into because they get logged out automatically every 15 minutes for security reasons. Multiple clicks, go find the patient, go find the most recent clinical, like scroll through the record. It's something that just breaks their flow, is frustrating and difficult to do. So they just don't do it. And so they're often just, pattern matching pictures and not thinking about what is clinically going on for that patient. And I think that's fine for the majority of the studies, which are normal and you can recognize normal quite easily. But what we're trying to do is stop those 1 in 1,000 cases, because we use x-rays to screen for serious conditions. And as a screening tool, it means that most of them are normal and most of them are uninteresting. And we know from how humans work that if you show them a whole bunch of normal, uninteresting things, they will miss the one interesting thing that's hidden in there. So this tool is really to try and support that and to reduce that risk. But then, like I said, because we're using this as a study for how can we, build this software to actually create improved clinician workflow. For us, we're building in kind of smart autocomplete for reporting. We'll build a clinical notes view. We'll just keep building out the access to information so that it becomes easier and easier and easier for people first to report x-rays, but then for other doctors just to write their clinical notes. Because one thing that stands out to me is that you go into an emergency department and half the staff will be stuck at computers typing notes rather than seeing patients. And, if you see a patient, you might spend 20 minutes with a patient, but then you're probably going to spend another 10, 20 minutes at least to write a note for that patient. And if you've got 4 or 5 patients on the go, you might be going 2-3 hours before you get the chance to sit down and actually write some notes. And at which point you've kind of forgotten everything that you've talked about. And so a lot of errors just get introduced through that way. So ultimately we want to be pushing kind of smart voice interactions, autocomplete of text fields, all this kind of stuff, so that when the clinician sits down, they only have to spend, 20, 30 seconds even would be ideal to get out all the relevant clinical information and have the system fill out and populate the rest. We see a world where, you can come to the end of a patient consult, quickly dictate something into your iPhone, have it turn up in our system. They can come back at their desk in 20, 30 minutes, just, fact check what was put there and click submit to the clinical record, so that doctors can be spending all their time actually doing patient-focused work and patient-centered work rather than becoming these data entry workers that we currently are. And because it's a big issue for us is the fact that our current electronic medical record is built first for around billing. It's built around auditing. It's built around kind of making sure that the hospital is safe in case something goes wrong and you can go back through and audit all the notes. But it's not built around helping clinicians actually get a usable idea of what is going on for a patient. And so, it doesn't have a very good unified patient view where you can go, oh, who's this person here? He's been in our hospital, 20, 30 times over the last 10 years. I can't see with ease, like all their information about their clinical conditions, their medications, their observations, all this kind of stuff. It's just, at the moment, it's just information overload. And so heaps of mistakes get made. And so we're kind of using this almost like a Trojan horse for us to get started in this area. We want to come in, we will hopefully solve a very low-hanging, straightforward problem. But at the same time, we're building out a platform. So our platform, we can, support AI models. We can easily spin up thousands of AI models and have them sitting on endpoints. And we've got an integration platform that's able to kind of funnel data from that to the user interface and back and forth and all this kind of stuff. And we'll be doing, reinforcement learning, transfer learning, all the buzzwords. It's all pretty exciting and it's all there. And so right now we're just focusing on this one very straightforward use case, and then the sky's the limit from there.
Yeah, that's really cool. Lots of good points in there. I wanted to go back to something you said where you pointed out that this technology will support clinicians in their job and it's not taking over. And I think that that's a really important point because, some people do have the impression that when we try and integrate, advanced AI into any sort of field, but into the medical field, is it taking over the job of doctors? And are you just going to be dealing with robots? And what's that going to be like? But it's actually the opposite. It's just you're taking away the labor of these clinicians spending their valuable time entering data, and like you said, looking through these scans, and humans make mistakes, and having to that all that energy and that focus. And if you can just direct that focus to patients who really need the care, I think that's so important. And that's a really good point to highlight about what this technology can do. So it's not only improving patient care and patient outcomes, it's helping the clinician do their job better and maybe enjoy their job more instead of having to spend a lot of time entering data and being too deep in that sort of side of things. So yeah, it's really exciting. Yeah. So Tobin, we do have another question for you. Do you plan to use the consent apps on site at the hospitals as well as for telehealth consultant? Oh, just jumped, or just one or the other?
Both. So getting it into a physical setting in a hospital, I think, is paramount, because that's where most of the consent process goes on. Is the doctor hands you something, or the nurse hands you something, or admin hands you something, and then you go through it yourself. We think that the telehealth aspect is just something that will be super interesting down the line to kind of free up the space and let you actually take it home and think about it. But most situations will be in a clinical setting, in a hospital, actually clicking through it. Great question.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's needed everywhere, right? Where any consent is required. So that's great. I would like something that translates all those complicated terms and conditions just into normal, into layman's terms.
What the words mean.
Yeah, exactly. So I can only imagine if English isn't your first language. We have another question from Ian Scott to all panelists. So it says, I would argue that we overuse x-rays, especially for screening purposes, forcing referring clinicians to enter clinical information and their reasons for the x-ray request may actually prompt them to think more critically about why they want it, which may act to reduce overuse. We don't want to use AI to make inappropriate requests easier to do. So that's an interesting point. Sort of countering what this may mean.
Oh, look, and it's absolutely true. I mean, human bad habits are at the base and the cause of most of clinical issue errors and clinical overuse. And in that case, I totally agree with Dr. Scott. I would just say that, you know, trying to stop people from you know, changing their habits is pretty difficult, and I'm not sure that we would be able to achieve that on a global medical level. So to me, I'd say that let's try and solve it using software and making it easier for people to be better.
Yep, great answer. So another question for Nimai from Zoran. He says, really interesting, you're using reinforcement learning to improve the algorithm. Would you be able to elaborate what parameters it applies to and what was your experience so far from using it?
So at the moment, so the parameters are just on the basis of the actual diagnosis that the patient or the user puts in. But in terms of how and what it looks like in practice, given that we haven't yet rolled this out and we don't have people using this, so I guess it's a bit too early to comment on how useful that aspect of the software will be. And it may be something that definitely sounds good on a slide or as a bit of PR, and we may well find that we can train the model well enough with existing data, and that having the reinforcement learning in there doesn't add anything. But that would be something that we would then look to probably do further research into once we have this this working, and I can very easily see us doing a protocol on comparing just a trained model versus one that has been in use for 6 months and having, you know, clinicians add to it, and just comparing the outputs and seeing how they look. So watch this space.
Awesome. And then question for Tobin. Informed consent can apply to privacy consent and medical treatment, research, all sorts of areas. From your presentation, I think you have a general solution, but your focus at the moment is medical treatment. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. A good question / comment, Joan. Yeah, I mean, it is a general solution, but you have to start somewhere. You have to fix one problem to solve first. And the medical is really cool. I mean, it's the motivation coming from this datathon, and it's where a lot of the connections are. But extending to research and these kind of the privacy challenges is really cool work that, you know, won't be hard to scale up from once you've solved the first problem.
Yep, that's it. And I think, you know, where is more important than the medical space, right? If you're having something done that affects your health,
yeah,
you know, you really, that's probably the place you want to start. But it's true, this could apply, you know, in many other situations, which is what's cool about this kind of technology, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so another question. Is there a risk that you are steering the labeling towards the mean of the user's previously labeled images and diagnostic biases? Much the same way as you mentioned earlier, that showing someone lots of images of nothing in a row leads them to missing diagnosis. So obviously question for Nimai.
Yeah, and look, absolutely, that's a real possibility, and you know, and I guess this is where, you know, it's the next step for research into AI. Is we've done, you know, the data scientists have done an amazing job of publishing these models that have amazing AUCs for off the basis of training sets, but we're lacking in information and data on what happens once you let these AI models out into practice and into the real world. And that's one of the reasons why we're trying to push and take like for us, we're doing the product development, but just as important for us is actually to be publishing our results as we go, and because that kind of allows us and the rest of the industry to have a discussion about what is the best way to use this technology in a clinical space, and highlighting, you know, the external validity is something that lots of people are looking at, and we're all trying to look and figure out more about, and yeah, that will really be something that we need to watch.
Fantastic. Well, we're getting close to time, and we seem to have no more questions. So thanks for everyone for posting those really good questions, and thanks to both of you for your excellent presentations. It really is so great to see these outcomes from the Datathon. Obviously, there's still a bit of a way to go, but you've both made great progress, both your teams. And I think that, we really want to make sure that, people realize this is what the Queensland AI Hub wants to do. And so it doesn't stop here. We are going to have lots more events, lots of more resources that are available for people to link in with the hub. And if they have ideas like this, we really want to support the development of them and link you up with the right support so that these can move forward. So very cool. And obviously as your ideas progress, we'll keep in touch, and maybe once they're in the system, we'll have to do another catch up, and you can tell us about all of the amazing results you're getting and feedback. That will be really exciting to see that happen. We will be having, so as I said, next year, there'll be another Medical Datathon being run, fingers crossed. So keep in touch, anyone who's watching who's interested in this area, and do please reach out if you want to look at doing something like this. If there are any more questions, also feel free to reach out to the AI Hub. We can try and get you in touch with Nimai and Tobin to answer those as well. There will be another medical datathon, another medical webinar coming up next month. We'll have an interesting use case, so a showcase of an app that's been developed using AI for healthcare. So look forward to that coming out very soon, and you can register for that as soon as it's out. So thanks everyone for joining us. Hope you all have a good afternoon, and see you again soon at the next event.